The sky over the Philippines was painted in ominous shades of gray, a harbinger of the devastation to come. Typhoon Agila, one of the strongest storms in decades, had made landfall, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Entire villages were submerged under floodwaters, homes reduced to rubble, and families displaced overnight. The once bustling streets of Tacloban City were now eerily silent, save for the sound of rushing water and the cries of those searching for loved ones. Manny Pacquiao, now a seasoned statesman and philanthropist, sat in his modest office in General Santos City, watching the live news coverage. Images of children clinging to makeshift rafts, elderly men wading through waist-deep water, and mothers clutching their babies filled the screen. His heart ached with every frame. Manny had always been deeply connected to his roots, and seeing his fellow Filipinos suffer ignited a fire within him. He knew this was not just another crisis, it was a moment that demanded action. The storm had spared no one. Even in areas outside the typhoon's direct path, the ripple effects were felt. Crops were destroyed, power lines were down, and access to clean water became a luxury. Relief efforts were underway, but the scale of the disaster was overwhelming. International aid trickled in, but it was clear that more was needed, urgently. Manny's mind raced as he thought of the countless families who had lost everything, their lives uprooted in the blink of an eye. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages. His team of advisors, community leaders, and even childhood friends reached out, urging him to take action. But Manny didn't need convincing. He had lived through poverty, felt the sting of hunger, and understood the despair of losing everything. This wasn't just a call to action, it was personal. He remembered his own childhood, the nights spent with an empty stomach, and the days when hope seemed like a distant dream. Those memories fueled his determination. As the rain continued to pour outside, Manny called for an emergency meeting. His wife, Jinky, joined him, her face etched with concern. Their children offered quiet support, sensing the gravity of the situation. Manny's mother, Dionysia, whispered a prayer in the corner, her rosary beads clutched tightly in her hands. The family's unity in the face of adversity was a testament to the values Manny had always cherished: faith, resilience, and love. The meeting room was filled with a mix of familiar faces and new allies. Among them were Angelo, a logistics expert, and Rosario, a passionate community organizer from Tacloban. Maps of the affected regions were spread across the table, marked with red circles indicating the hardest-hit areas. The air was thick with urgency as plans were discussed and finalized. Manny knew that financial aid was the cornerstone of recovery, but he also understood that money alone wasn't enough. What the people needed was hope, a reminder that they weren't alone. The next morning, Manny boarded a helicopter bound for Tacloban. The aerial view was heartbreaking. Fields that once bore crops were now vast lakes of muddy water. Yet, amidst the devastation, there were signs of life. People waving from rooftops, children playing in puddles, and communities sharing what little they had. The resilience of the Filipino spirit shone through the darkest of times. As the helicopter landed, a crowd gathered, their faces lighting up at the sight of Manny. For many, he was more than just a boxing legend. He was a symbol of hope. Manny stepped out, his boots sinking into the muddy ground, and began shaking hands, listening to stories, and offering words of comfort. That evening, as he sat under a makeshift tent, sharing a simple meal with the locals, Manny felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long, but he was determined to help his people rebuild their lives. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the thick clouds over Tacloban. The air was heavy with the scent of mud and seawater, a stark reminder of the typhoon's wrath. Manny Pacquiao stood at the edge of a devastated neighborhood, his boots sinking into the wet ground. Around him, the remnants of what were once homes lay scattered: wooden beams, shattered glass, and torn clothing. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was movement. Families were salvaging what they could, their faces a mix of exhaustion and quiet determination. Manny's presence had drawn a crowd. Children peeked out from behind their parents, some too shy to approach, while others ran up to him with wide eyes and hopeful smiles. For them, Manny wasn't just a boxing champion. He was a symbol of resilience, someone who had risen from poverty to inspire millions. He knelt to greet them, his hands resting gently on their shoulders as he asked their names and listened to their stories. Each word weighed heavily on him, but he knew that listening was the first step toward healing. As the day unfolded, Manny visited makeshift shelters where families huddled together under tarpaulins and salvaged materials. He met Rosario, the community organizer who had been coordinating relief efforts tirelessly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the toll the disaster had taken on her. She explained the immediate needs: clean water, food, medical supplies, and temporary housing. Manny nodded, taking mental notes of every detail. He knew that addressing these needs would require more than just resources. It would require trust, coordination, and unwavering commitment. Back in the city center, Manny convened with local leaders and volunteers. Angelo, the logistics expert, laid out a plan to distribute supplies efficiently. Trucks loaded with relief goods were ready to be dispatched, but the roads were treacherous, many of them blocked by debris. Manny suggested using boats to reach isolated communities, an idea that was met with nods of agreement. He emphasized the importance of prioritizing the most vulnerable: children, the elderly, and those with medical conditions. As the meeting progressed, Manny's phone buzzed with updates from his team in General Santos City. Donations were pouring in, not just from the Philippines but from around the world. Jericho, his old friend, had successfully secured partnerships with international organizations, ensuring a steady flow of aid. But Manny knew that money alone wouldn't solve the crisis. He needed to ensure that every peso was used effectively, with complete transparency. The people's trust was fragile, and he couldn't afford to lose it. That afternoon, Manny joined a group of volunteers distributing food packs and bottled water. The lines were long, stretching down the street, but the atmosphere was one of quiet gratitude. Manny worked alongside the volunteers, handing out supplies and exchanging words of encouragement. A young boy named Emil approached him, clutching a small, tattered notebook. Inside were sketches of boxing gloves and a portrait of Manny. The boy's eyes lit up as Manny signed the notebook and told him to never stop dreaming. As the sun began to set, Manny found himself standing on a hill overlooking the city. The view was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Below, the devastation was evident, but so was the resilience of the people. Fires burned in small clusters as families prepared meals, their laughter and chatter carrying through the air. Manny thought of his own journey, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the victories. He realized that this was his greatest fight yet, not in the ring, but in the hearts of his people. That evening, under the dim glow of a lantern, Manny wrote a speech to address the nation. He spoke of unity, resilience, and the Filipino spirit that had carried them through countless challenges. His words were broadcast across the country, reaching even the most remote villages. For many, it was a beacon of hope, a reminder that they were not alone. Manny knew the road ahead would be long, but he was ready. This was more than just disaster relief. It was a fight for the soul of a nation. The early morning air in Tacloban carried a faint chill, but the city was already alive with activity. The hum of chainsaws cutting through fallen trees and the rhythmic pounding of hammers echoed through the streets. Manny Pacquiao stood in the middle of a reconstruction site, surrounded by volunteers and locals who were determined to rebuild what the typhoon had taken from them. The scene was chaotic but hopeful, proof that even in the face of devastation, the Filipino spirit remained unbroken. Manny had spent the last few days meeting with engineers, architects, and community leaders to plan the rebuilding efforts. Temporary shelters had been set up, but the focus now was on creating something more permanent. Schools, clinics, and homes were priorities, and Manny was determined to ensure that these structures would not only be rebuilt, but also fortified to withstand future storms. He had personally allocated funds from his foundation to jumpstart the efforts, but he knew it wasn't enough. He needed more partners, more resources, and more time. Rosario, the community organizer, approached Manny with a clipboard in hand. She had been working tirelessly to coordinate the efforts on the ground, and her dedication was evident in the dark circles under her eyes. She updated Manny on the progress. Several families had already moved into temporary housing, and a shipment of construction materials was expected to arrive later that day. Manny listened intently, offering words of encouragement and gratitude for her hard work. As the day progressed, Manny visited a school that had been turned into a temporary shelter. The classrooms were filled with families, their belongings neatly arranged in corners. Children played in the courtyard, their laughter a stark contrast to the somber reality around them. Manny knelt down to speak with a group of children who were drawing on scraps of paper. One of them, a girl named Ligaya, showed him a picture of a house with a bright red roof. "This is our new house," she said with a shy smile. Manny felt a lump in his throat, but managed to smile back. "It's beautiful," he said, promising himself that he would do everything in his power to make her dream a reality. Later that afternoon, Manny joined a group of volunteers unloading a truck filled with construction materials. The work was physically demanding, but Manny didn't shy away. He carried sacks of cement, stacked wooden planks, and even helped mix concrete. His presence inspired those around him, reminding them that they were not alone in this fight. For Manny, this wasn't just about rebuilding structures, it was about restoring dignity and hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Manny gathered with the community for a simple meal. They sat on benches and makeshift tables, sharing stories and laughter. An elderly man named Florencio approached Manny, his hands trembling as he held out a small wooden carving. It was a figure of a boxer, intricately detailed despite its rough edges. "You've always fought for us," Florencio said, his voice thick with emotion. "Now it's our turn to fight with you." Manny accepted the gift with a deep bow, his heart swelling with gratitude. That evening, as Manny returned to his tent, he reflected on the day's events. The road to recovery was long and fraught with challenges, but the resilience and unity he had witnessed gave him hope. He knew that rebuilding Tacloban was more than just a physical task. It was about healing the wounds left by the storm and giving people a reason to believe in a brighter future. Under the dim light of a lantern, Manny wrote in his journal, a habit he had picked up during his boxing days. "Today, I saw strength," he wrote, "not in the muscles of men, but in their hearts. Together, we will rise." The first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds over Tacloban, casting a golden glow on the city's battered landscape. Manny Pacquiao stood on a makeshift stage in the town square, surrounded by volunteers, local leaders, and families who had gathered to hear him speak. The air was filled with a sense of anticipation, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Manny adjusted the microphone, his eyes scanning the crowd. He could see the weariness etched on their faces, but also the glimmers of hope that refused to be extinguished. Manny's voice was steady as he began to speak. He talked about resilience, about the Filipino spirit that had carried them through countless challenges. He reminded them that while the storm had taken much, it had not taken their unity, their courage, or their will to rebuild. His words resonated deeply, drawing applause and cheers from the crowd. For many, it was a moment of catharsis, a reminder that they were not alone in their struggle. After the speech, Manny spent hours walking through the square, shaking hands, listening to stories, and offering words of encouragement. He met a young mother named Marites, who had lost her home but managed to save her 2 children by clinging to a piece of driftwood for hours. Her story was one of countless others that underscored the resilience of the human spirit. Manny promised her that help was on the way, and for the first time in days, she smiled. Meanwhile, the rebuilding efforts were gaining momentum. Trucks loaded with construction materials arrived from neighboring provinces, and volunteers worked tirelessly to clear debris and lay the foundation for new homes. Angelo, the logistics expert, had organized a system to ensure that resources were distributed fairly and efficiently. Rosario, the community organizer, continued to coordinate efforts on the ground, her energy seemingly endless despite the challenges. Manny knew that the scope of the disaster required more than just local efforts. He made calls to international organizations, leveraging his global reputation to secure additional aid. Donations poured in from around the world, from ordinary citizens to high-profile figures who had been inspired by Manny's dedication. Every peso, every dollar was accounted for, with Manny personally overseeing the allocation of funds. Transparency was his priority, and he made sure that every decision was communicated clearly to the public. One afternoon, Manny visited a newly constructed community center. It was a modest building, but it represented a significant step forward. Inside, children attended makeshift classes, while adults gathered to discuss plans for the future. Manny watched as a teacher handed out notebooks and pencils to a group of eager students. Among them was Ligaya, the girl who had shown him her drawing of a house. She waved at him, her face beaming with joy. Manny felt a surge of pride, knowing that this was just the beginning. As the day came to an end, Manny joined a group of fishermen repairing their boats by the shore. The sea, once a source of terror, was now a symbol of renewal. The men shared stories of their plans to return to fishing, their laughter echoing across the water. Manny helped them tie nets and secure planks, his hands calloused but steady. For him, this was more than just a gesture. It was a way to connect with the people he was fighting for. That evening, under a starlit sky, Manny gathered with his team to reflect on their progress. The road ahead was still long, but the unity and determination he had witnessed filled him with hope. "We're not just rebuilding homes," he said, his voice firm. "We're rebuilding lives, dreams, and a future for our people." As the team dispersed, Manny looked out at the horizon where the sea met the sky. In that moment, he felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just a fight for recovery, it was a fight for the soul of a nation. The sound of hammers striking nails echoed through the air as the rebuilding efforts in Tacloban continued at full force. Manny Pacquiao walked through the construction site, his boots kicking up clouds of dust. Around him, volunteers and locals worked side by side, their faces glistening with sweat but alight with determination. The progress was visible. Walls were being raised, roofs were being secured, and roads were slowly becoming passable again. Yet Manny knew that the true heroes of this recovery were not the ones in the spotlight, but the countless individuals who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. One of those silent heroes was Rosario, the community organizer who had become the backbone of the relief efforts. Manny found her in a makeshift office, surrounded by stacks of papers and a whiteboard filled with schedules and supply lists. Her voice was calm but firm as she coordinated with volunteers over the phone. When she finally hung up, Manny approached her with a smile. "You're the real champion here," he said, his tone sincere. Rosario shook her head, brushing off the compliment. "We all have our roles to play," she replied, her eyes betraying the exhaustion she refused to acknowledge. Manny spent the morning visiting families who had moved into newly constructed homes. Each visit was a reminder of why this work mattered. He met a father named Rogelio, who had lost his wife in the storm but was now rebuilding his life for the sake of his two young sons. The small house they now called home was modest, but it was a sanctuary, a place where they could begin to heal. Manny sat with Rogelio on the front steps, listening as the man spoke about his dreams for his children. "They deserve a future," Rogelio said, his voice breaking. Manny placed a hand on his shoulder, silently vowing to do everything in his power to ensure that future. Meanwhile, Angelo, the logistics expert, was overseeing the distribution of supplies to remote areas. Manny joined him on a trip to a village that had been cut off by landslides. The journey was treacherous, with narrow paths and unstable terrain, but Manny insisted on going. When they finally arrived, they were met with cheers and tears of gratitude. The villagers had been surviving on what little they could salvage, and the arrival of food, water, and medical supplies was a lifeline. Manny helped unload the truck, his hands blistered but steady. For him, this was not just an act of charity, it was a responsibility. As the day turned to evening, Manny returned to the town square, where a group of volunteers had gathered for a small celebration. There was music, laughter, and a shared sense of accomplishment. An elderly woman named Salvacion approached Manny with a basket of freshly baked bread. "This is for you," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for not forgetting us." Manny accepted the gift with a deep bow, his heart swelling with gratitude. That night, Manny sat alone under the stars, reflecting on the day's events. The road to recovery was still long, but the progress they had made was undeniable. He thought about the people he had met, their resilience, their courage, and their unwavering hope. They were the true heroes of this story, and Manny was honored to stand beside them. As he closed his eyes, Manny whispered a silent prayer. "Thank you for giving me the strength to fight this battle," he said. "And thank you for the silent heroes who fight alongside me." The morning air was crisp as Manny Pacquiao stood on the edge of a newly rebuilt fishing dock, watching the waves lap gently against the shore. Around him, fishermen prepared their boats, their laughter and chatter filling the air. The dock, once reduced to splinters by Typhoon Agila, was now a symbol of resilience and renewal. For Manny, it marked a turning point, not just for Tacloban, but for the entire nation. The recovery efforts were gaining momentum, and hope was beginning to take root. Manny had spent weeks immersed in the rebuilding process, But the challenges were far from over. While progress was visible in the city center, remote villages were still struggling to recover. Manny knew that true recovery meant reaching every corner of the affected region, no matter how difficult the journey. That morning, he and his team boarded a small boat loaded with supplies, bound for a village accessible only by water. The journey was long, the sun beating down relentlessly, but Manny remained focused. He had made a promise to leave no one behind. When they arrived, the villagers greeted them with open arms. Children ran along the shoreline, waving and shouting excitedly. Manny stepped off the boat, his boots sinking into the soft sand. He was met by an elderly man named Teofilo, the village leader, who guided him through the community. The damage was still evident, homes reduced to rubble, fishing nets torn and unusable. But there was also a sense of determination. The villagers had begun rebuilding with whatever materials they could find, their resourcefulness a testament to their resilience. Manny spent the day working alongside the villagers, helping to repair fishing nets and reinforce the walls of a small school. He listened as Teofilo shared stories of the storm's aftermath, his voice tinged with both sorrow and hope. "We've lost much," Teofilo said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "But we've also gained something, each other." Manny nodded, deeply moved by the man's words. It was a reminder that recovery was not just about rebuilding structures, but about strengthening the bonds that held communities together. As the sun began to set, Manny gathered with the villagers for a simple meal. They sat on woven mats under the open sky, sharing stories and laughter. A young boy named Panfilo approached Manny with a small wooden carving of a boat. "This is for you," he said shyly. Manny accepted the gift with a smile, his heart swelling with gratitude. It was moments like these that reminded him why he had taken on this fight. Back in Tacloban, the progress was undeniable. Roads were being cleared, homes were being rebuilt, and businesses were beginning to reopen. Manny's efforts had inspired others to step forward. From local leaders to international organizations, donations continued to pour in, and the sense of unity was palpable. For the first time since the storm, there was a sense of forward momentum, a belief that the worst was behind them. That night, as Manny sat in his tent, he reflected on the day's events. The journey had been long and arduous, but it was far from over. Still, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The people of Tacloban had shown him what true strength looked like, and he was determined to honor their resilience. Under the dim glow of a lantern, Manny wrote in his journal, "Today I saw hope," he wrote, "not in the buildings we've rebuilt, but in the hearts of the people. Together, we will rise." The streets of Tacloban were alive with the sounds of rebuilding, the rhythmic pounding of hammers, the hum of generators, and the chatter of volunteers filled the air. Manny Pacquiao walked through the bustling town square, now transformed into a hub of activity. Around him, stalls had been set up to distribute food, medical supplies, and construction materials. The once devastated city was slowly coming back to life, and Manny could feel the energy of a community determined to rise from the rubble. Manny's day began early, as always. He joined a group of volunteers at a newly constructed community center, where families gathered to receive updates on the rebuilding efforts. Inside, children attended makeshift classes, their laughter echoing through the halls. Manny watched as a teacher handed out notebooks and pencils, her face lighting up as the children eagerly began to write. Among them was Ligaya, the girl who had shown him her drawing of a house weeks earlier. She waved at him, her smile brighter than ever. Manny felt a surge of pride, knowing that these small victories were the foundation of a brighter future. Later that morning, Manny met with Rosario and Angelo to discuss the next phase of the recovery plan. The focus was shifting from immediate relief to long-term sustainability. Rosario outlined plans for vocational training programs aimed at helping residents rebuild their livelihoods. Angelo presented a proposal to establish a disaster preparedness center, ensuring that the community would be better equipped to face future challenges. Manny listened intently, offering his full support. He knew that true recovery required more than just rebuilding. It required empowering the people to take control of their future. As the meeting concluded, Manny received a call from Jericho, his old friend who had been coordinating international aid. Jericho shared the news that a major donation had been secured from an overseas foundation, enough to fund the construction of a new school and a health clinic. Manny's heart swelled with gratitude. He knew that this was a testament to the power of unity, not just within Tacloban but across the globe. People from all walks of life had come together to support a cause greater than themselves. That afternoon, Manny visited a group of fishermen repairing their boats by the shore. The sea, once a source of terror, was now a symbol of renewal. The men shared stories of their plans to return to fishing, their laughter mingling with the sound of waves. Manny helped them tie nets and secure planks, his hands calloused but steady. For him, this was more than just a gesture. It was a way to connect with the people he was fighting for. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Manny gathered with the community for a celebration. There was music, dancing, and a shared sense of accomplishment. An elderly woman named Salvacion approached Manny with tears in her eyes. "You've given us hope," she said, her voice trembling. Manny smiled, his heart heavy with emotion. "No," he replied softly. "You've given me hope." That night, as Manny sat under the stars, he reflected on the power of unity. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought people together in ways he had never imagined. In their strength, he found his own, and in their hope, he found a renewed sense of purpose. The sun rose over Tacloban, casting a warm golden light on a city transformed. What had once been a landscape of devastation was now a testament to resilience and unity. New homes stood where rubble had been. Schools buzzed with the laughter of children, and markets brimmed with life. Manny Pacquiao stood on a hill overlooking the city, his heart swelling with pride. The journey had been long and arduous, but the sight before him was proof that hope could triumph over even the darkest of storms. That morning, Manny attended the inauguration of a new school, funded by international donations and built by the hands of local volunteers. The building was modest but sturdy, painted in bright colors that reflected the vibrancy of the community. As Manny walked through the gates, he was greeted by the sound of children singing. Their voices filled the air, a melody of gratitude and joy. Among them was Ligaya, the girl who had dreamed of a house with a red roof. She ran up to Manny, holding a drawing of the new school. "This is for you," she said, her smile radiant. Manny knelt to accept the gift, his eyes glistening with tears. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Teachers, parents, and students shared stories of how the school would change their lives. Manny listened intently, his mind racing with thoughts of what more could be done. He knew that this was just the beginning. Education was the foundation of a brighter future, and he was determined to ensure that every child in Tacloban had access to it. As the ribbon was cut and the crowd erupted in applause, Manny felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was his greatest victory, not in the ring, but in the hearts of his people. Later that day, Manny visited a health clinic that had been rebuilt with funds from his foundation. Inside, doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to provide care to those in need. Manny spoke with patience, offering words of encouragement and gratitude to the medical staff. One elderly man named Florencio, who had survived the typhoon but lost his home, clasped Manny's hand tightly. "You've given us more than aid," he said. "You've given us a reason to believe again." Manny nodded, his voice catching as he replied, "It's you who inspire me." As the day drew to a close, Manny gathered with his team and the community for a final celebration. The town square was alive with music, dancing, and laughter. People shared meals and exchanged stories and embraced one another. It was a moment of unity, a reminder of what they had achieved together. Manny stood at the center, watching the scene unfold. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the progress they had made, but for the spirit of the people who had made it possible. That night, under a sky filled with stars, Manny sat alone, reflecting on the journey. The storm had tested them in ways they could never have imagined, but it had also revealed their strength. It had shown them that even in the face of unimaginable loss, they could rebuild not just their homes, but their dreams, their dignity, and their hope. As Manny closed his journal, he wrote one final entry. "This is not the end. It's the beginning of a new chapter for Tacloban, for the Philippines, and for all of us. Together, we have proven that no storm is stronger than the human spirit, and together, we will continue to rise." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to our channel.